if I don't have a kid, if I don't have a baby, can I ever answer my primal question? And I think that's probably it. Can I ever answer it?
We talk about how an unmet need pretty much drives everything. We are our best selves when that need is met. We're an anxious self. We are a scrambling self when there sits that unmet need.
I had to relinquish control. This is not the way to answer my primal question. I need to tap into reality in a way that's healthy.
Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Foster. Welcome to the Primal Question podcast, where we just talk about the question that is driving our life, that is formed by our deepest emotional need. We love talking about the things that are below the surface and core. And what I would say, we like talking about the roots, not so much about the branches, and getting to really why we do what we do and understand those hidden forces that drive our decisions, our relationships, our mission in life. And today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about Primal Question number 7, do I have purpose? And joining me today is my new friend, Doug. Doug, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
I'm so excited to talk about you and your Primal Question because there's so much connected to it in terms of your story and who you are.
Yeah.
And all the incredible things that you're actually doing in the world today. So first of all, talk to how did you discover your Primal Question, by the way? What was how did you get introduced to it?
Through you. And
through me. Okay.
Understanding what primal questions are. Obviously understanding personality is a huge thing for me. Understanding where I come from, my unique ooze of personality, trauma, experiences that kind of make us who we are. So I think, through your book and through what you've done, figuring out what is it that, how do I better understand myself and understand the things that I'm so motivated by. And that kind of led me to being a, Q7. What is my purpose in life? It's something I would say I'm plagued with, which maybe might be true of a lot of people who really find what that question is that they're searching for.
I call it calling angst.
Yeah,
there's
for
this
sure.
angst of trying to discover our purpose. And exactly what that looks like and what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was younger, there is that sense of angst. You're kind of grinding against something you don't really know what it is. But you're looking out at the world going, why am I always bent this way? And then, in adulthood, hopefully you have wise people coaching you towards what that is and how to fulfill that in a meaningful way,
So I always love to understand not only what somebody's primal question is, but how it got there.
Yeah.
And so I talk about it in the book quite a bit, this whole idea of the early childhood experiences create the imprint of the question. And it doesn't necessarily associate with necessarily trauma. It's really about confusion and a kid trying to figure out what purpose means and what impact actually looks like. And somewhere in the messaging in our childhood, there was just a question that never really fully got answered. And so we carry it. And purpose just becomes the thing that is the need that we have. So talk to me about, how do you think this question got there for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, it got there over time, I think. I've always been a very imaginative person, a very inquisitive person, and I have always loved studying movements. My background's in philosophy. I don't know if you can call me a philosopher. All my degrees are in philosophy.
Call you a philosopher.
You don't have to. I don't really know what makes someone a philosopher, but so I've always been very interested in that, in the academic world and even just movements and big things like that. So I always looked up to pastors and philosophers and thinkers. And it left this question in me of, well, what's my contribution? My grandfather was a scientist, worked on the nuclear bomb, which is super cool. And I've always looked up to my dad, my parents. My dad's an artist. And I just have seen people doing these things. And it made a question arise in me. Well, what's my thing? What's how am I contributing? What's my purpose? And I think through adolescence, that just grew. It just grew and grew and grew. And there's a bunch of unique things, that happened to me that kind of probably reinforced that. Do
you remember one specifically or one perhaps moment where maybe you got a no to that purpose question, or there was some pain around the idea of purpose? Do you remember anything like that?
It's got to be in my teenage years, wanting to make a contribution and really looking up to people who were making contributions. And maybe there's, when you're a teenager, there's that kind of idling out. What are you supposed to do when you're 16? There's really not much you can do besides go to school, skateboard, things like that. Yeah. But looking up to people and maybe feeling I think maybe I want to say a deficiency, maybe that there's like this, am I like that? I want to be at that level, and then kind of looking to get that reinforced. But then your buddies are also 16, and how well can they answer that question for you? So you start to create a searching. I think that's probably in there for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this aspirational goal that you want to get to, and this pressure to think like, how am I going to get there?
Yeah.
And then you look at the reality going, I'm just a 16-year-old kid. I feel like I'm not having any impact or any significance, or I'm not inventing the nuclear bomb. Like, what was it? Your grandfather?
Yeah. Grandfather. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden there is sort of this gap, and you start wondering, and there's sort of this pressure like, okay, what is my purpose?
Yeah.
How can I make my dent in the universe?
Right.
What does that look like? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah. And you know what? Okay, I'll add to that. So I grew up in the church, right? It was a Christian church. And I think there's a lot of things that are just in the water, if that makes sense, about life that you start to assume, and you go, okay, well, I'll find my purpose in that thing. I became a pastor for a long time. And maybe that's because I looked up to pastors and was like, okay, they have purpose and they're really searching out their calling. But I'll add too, so like family was a huge one. We'll discover as we keep talking, my wife and I were never able to have kids. We both struggle with profound infertility. And I think we looked at people who had parents or who were parents, and they were fulfilling a certain purpose in being a parent. So just like all these little things started to get added in. Okay, so I got to become a dad. I always really wanted to be a young dad. I was always I don't know where that came from, but I just wanted to have this youthful experience of being a dad. So that was in there. Being a pastor was in there. And all of it started to build. So I would say that there was this desire to have a overall purpose, but then I think I started to find purpose in all sorts of little things that I was assuming were going to come true in my life.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
The infertility part. So there's this goal or a vision for our life that says, I'm going to be a young dad.
Yeah.
And maybe the equation looks like, when I'm a young dad, my life will be purposeful. I'll have impact in my child's life. There's just all these details and dynamics attached to being a young father.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and really that answering your question of, do I have purpose? Well, yes, because I'm now a young father, but we're actually getting a pretty strong no there.
Yeah.
Talk to me about wrestling through that season of life and really just trying to make sense of that.
Absolutely. I think I love that, in psychology, there's that idea of the ideal self, that version of yourself that this is who I assume that I'll become or who I want to become. And fatherhood was definitely in there for me. You could almost say it was actually maybe one below the ideal self, just the assumed self. I looked forward and I just assumed.
Right.
Of course, if I wanted to be a young dad, we would just be, have that be true. My wife and I both wanted that. So then when we encountered infertility, it takes a while to kind of encounter infertility. They tell you to try to have kids for about a year before you even go see a doctor. So then you're a year into it. And then the first sort of test that I did discovered that I was almost, practically totally infertile. So from the medical side of things, I'm getting this very hard no to something that I feel like would have created a lot of purpose in my life and given me a lot of that sense of meaning. And then discovering my wife equally has infertility issues. Now we're a couple years in, we're saving money to do a treatment. And I would say it's very difficult for us because it wasn't this relational no that we were getting. I was kind of putting out into the universe. I guess this is where it gets probably the most difficult for me is I'm almost asking God or universe, God, can I fulfill my primal question? Do I have a purpose? Because if I'm a father, then I have purpose. And then is God saying no to my primal question? What's going on? Like, how do I make sense of that?
Yes.
And I think that was the hardest thing to cope with, because it sent me into, like you say, this kind of like frenzy of trying to solve that primal question.
What did that look like for you? The scramble.
The scramble. Yeah. The scramble is I was trying to identify and find my purpose and have people validate me that, no, I do have a purpose. But I'll be honest with you, that's really hard to overcome, because as much as I could even come to you and say, Mike, I have a purpose if I'm not a dad, right? And you could say, absolutely, in the most genuine, sincere way. It's just a really big one to agree with that reality, for me to agree with you on that, to say, right, yeah, having kids I can still have a purpose. It took time. And I think there is the scramble for me was anxiety to try to solve that problem as quickly maybe or efficiently as possible. So treatment, how can I do treatment to overcome infertility? And then maybe we moved on and did adoption and foster care, which at that point, now I'm sprinting into adoption and foster care to solve that primal question, to answer, yes, I do have a purpose. I can be a parent, and let me adopt a child as quick as possible, go through foster care as quick as possible, which led to a lot of difficulty because you can't do those things quickly.
Right. So, okay, I love this, Doug. It's just so clear to me, like, how intense.
Yeah.
We talk about how an unmet need pretty much drives everything. Okay.
Yeah.
And we are our best selves when that need is met. But we're an anxious self. We are a scrambling self. We are not our best selves when there sits that unmet need. And clearly, just as you're talking about and describing this, it's like, this is a very significant thing that you're wrestling with. How do I get this need for purpose met? Okay, so you adopt, you, and again, how long did it take to go through the process of adoption?
Yeah.
So the needs unmet, even when we kind of have a really positive game plan and solution about being a father and parents. How long did that take?
Right. That's the difficult part, is years. I mean, you're kind of sitting with that question. So we were doing infertility treatments in that world for easily 2 years. And then we adopted, which took 2 years. And then we went through 2 disrupted adoptions, which took another 2 years. So, I mean, you're like nearing a decade of just kind of sitting with that question, validating it a little bit, kind of having a little bit of movement on it, but it becomes a crisis for people. So my wife and I, out of all of this, started a nonprofit, and we work with people. It's called Uniquely Knitted.
Okay, Uniquely Knitted.
Uniquely Knitted.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Yeah. The whole goal is that people need to process what they've gone through. And they need to find people to validate really their primal questions. So we put together a nonprofit. We do education, research, and support. The support is 6-week process groups, and you would love them. They're really, everything that I think that you're for is, we have to then validate these things that we're doubting, these questions that come up, these needs that we have. For us, we put together people who are all struggling with infertility to meet each other's needs. We start with reality and dig into the reality of what's going on, and then share our needs with one another. I need to know that I'm safe. I need to know that, I'm enough, or that I can still be successful in life if I don't have a kid. And I think that's the thing that I was struggling with, my wife and I, for sure, for that decade of struggling, is, if I don't have a kid, if I don't have a baby, can I ever answer my primal question? And I think that's probably it. Can I ever answer it?
Yes.
Or will it always be just a smaller version? So if you have someone who's thinking, am I am I safe or am I secure? And then you add on, if I don't have a baby, if I don't get pregnant, if, we get pregnant, but it's with a donor egg and it's my husband's DNA, but not mine. Can I ever be secure in a situation like that? So we validate those. We come together to just share those needs.
Sounds incredible. Number one, yes, I would totally love to be a part of these groups, because it is so, all the stuff bubbles up. Right?
Yeah.
All those things that have been with us, the needs, the primal questions, it all bubbles up, because I just can imagine the intensity of the process and the wrestling with infertility.
Yeah.
It's just all laid bare. There's no hiding anymore. It's like front and center for your marriage or your relationship, or for you as an individual.
Yeah.
It's all front and center.
Yeah. We talk about, there's new issues and there's old issues too. When it comes to infertility, for me, I'll just use my own self. There's this idea of, do I have a purpose? And this new issue is, do I have a purpose if I can never become a dad? It's only going to bring up all the old issues of where I got that question of, do I have a purpose? Or am I safe? There's this new question of, well, I have to do shots. I have to be exposed. People are going to know about that's way too much attention for me, which is only bringing up then the old issue of, well, how come I don't feel safe? So that you're going through so much at the same time, and it feels relentless because you just don't know how to get out of it. There's no easy way to solve it.
Hey friend, you and I have a hidden force driving our lives. It drives our choices, our behaviors, our triggers, our relationships, and even our strengths and our gifts. And most of us have no idea what it is or how to control it. And this hidden force is an unmet emotional need. There are 7 of them, and I call them the 7 primal questions. And when you don't know your primal question, it can wreak havoc on your life, because people will do whatever it takes to meet this need. And we can even try to meet that need in some pretty unhealthy ways. But when you identify your core emotional need, a lot of things begin to make sense. And you'll have the clarity to meet emotional needs for yourself and others in much healthier ways that have far-reaching effects on your life and your relationships. Take 5 minutes to discover your primal question today at primalquestion.com. So talk to me. Do you know your wife's primal question?
We talked about it last night. We go back and forth to, am I loved? Am I enough? That kind of in that world. Yeah.
Yeah. So both of those questions are often, people wrestle between those two because they're value-based questions.
Yeah.
It's about your value. And so I would imagine as you're doing this together, obviously there's stuff being brought up within her about value, stuff being brought up in you about purpose.
Yep.
How did you guys get through those questions together?
Yeah, that's great. I think it comes down to being vulnerable, to expose what this deep, vulnerable question is. To me, the primal questions are so vulnerable, because they're rooted in such tenderness,
Absolutely. It's a great way to say it.
And feeling safe enough to say, at the end of the day, yes, I want to know that I'm safe. I really want to know if I still can have purpose. That's such there's a way to expose that where you're transparent, but to be vulnerable about it, to share it in a way that's kind of risky, to say, I really need you to see me, that I want to feel like I have a purpose. I think vulnerability for us was the key. And I would say it's the key for our groups too, as well. The process groups we lead, creating an environment where we can be vulnerable about the one thing that really is vulnerable with this whole process. I think that's it's been so interesting for me in leading. We've led just hundreds. It's so amazing and honoring to hear so many stories, also heartbreaking too, as well. But the thing that's interesting is you can have, like we were saying, maybe a couple's going through this, and for one person, there's one thing that they're really wanting to seek validation for. And for another person, it can be a totally different thing. And they kind of go, yeah, I feel safe for this and this, but I just don't feel successful if I'm, or whatever it is, those questions there's usually a specific one that comes up.
So what would you say to someone who is right now listening to this in the throes of infertility and maybe losing hope here?
Yeah. I think finding people where you can do even what we're doing here, what you talk about doing, showing them who you really are in a vulnerable way. I think that's really hard. I'd love to know actually your thoughts on this it feels like you go through something like infertility and maybe the person who you used to go to, who validated a lot of your, primal question becomes triggering. Maybe it is your mom or your sister or something like that. And anytime you feel your thing come up, you kind of go to them and they're your rock, sort of your grounding. But maybe like your sister is also pregnant and you want to be pregnant. So then you're going to her. Does that make sense? And you're like, yes. You used to be the thing that grounded me. Now you're actually the thing that triggers me. So then you get isolated. That's probably one of the biggest issues with infertility is isolation. Yeah. You just feel kind of alone. You don't know who to go to. My encouragement would be to find a group of people where you feel safe and you can talk to. Because what do you do with that when all of a sudden your person becomes unavailable, I guess?
Yeah, well, that's such a great question. And what I would say is, number one, have the awareness of just because a person was such a great source of yeses for you.
Yeah.
And now you're in a season or experiencing a particular dynamic in life where that person is now a no or a maybe.
Yeah.
It's okay for us to understand that this relationship is impacting us in a different way. I think sometimes we get committed to relationships or friendships or structures that perhaps were positive for us in certain times of our life, but are no longer serving us. And it's okay for us to just have a check-in with that and say it's got to change. And usually what needs to change is some boundaries.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And being okay with those boundaries, because when you're in a battle, you have to be, and that you're getting a lot of no to that primal question and a lot of emotional dysregulation around it.
Yeah.
It's okay to be honest with that.
Yeah.
I would imagine you probably felt through this journey that you had to sort of keep a strong, hopeful, happy, demeanor. And, you're the purpose guy and God's, faith guy and pastor guy. And yet was probably many days where you just felt like, I'm giving up.
Yeah.
I'm in despair around this question.
Right. Absolutely. I think.
Do you remember your lowest moment in this journey?
I think I absolutely do. It was in the middle of adoption and foster care, just having so many adoptions fall through because my vision of getting this done was in a way forcing it, the scramble for sure. I love how you say you force. You'll find a way to force the yes. that my lowest point is the moments where I'm forcing those yeses and then they fall through. It's a kind of a free falling, very ungrounding. The ground sort of disappears and you don't know where to put your feet because how do I get this question answered? There is a sense of I had to relinquish control and say, okay, this is not the way to answer my primal question. To force this. I need to go about it a different way. I need to tap into reality in a way that's healthy and realize that my reality can exist with kids or without kids and both can be good. I only viewed it one way and I was forcing that. We're very, very lucky to have adopted twice. I forced that to happen. I'm so glad I did. That's such an amazing experience. But my experience of going through that process was kind of like a bulldozer. Like I was forcing those things to happen, not in any unethical way, but I was on it. My paperwork they gave it to me and I returned it the same day. I was as much as I could using my skills to get that stuff done. And when things would fall through, that would be my lowest point of just feeling like I don't even have a purpose in this, I'm trying to solve this question and I'm finding a purpose in solving this question, and I can't even do that.
Yeah.
So where am I in this whole process? You start to lose yourself.
I could see that so clearly, like, because part of the question of do I have purpose, really the outcome of that is having impact, right?
Yeah.
Because it isn't just about being a father, it's about what you'll do as a father and the influence of father and the experiences of father.
Yeah.
Like it's beyond just like a label or something that a singular event. It's this. And so here you are not having impact in the process. In fact, feeling like you're going backwards.
Yeah.
Like it's a waste what you're doing. And Q7's, the idea of meaninglessness is a huge trigger. And so I just imagine, doing all the work, none of it working, and just that despair around just, this is, why bother? What am I doing? Does any of this matter?
Yeah, absolutely. And Q7s, if I can speak, if you're a Q7, I'll speak
Please.
for you.
Please. There's a lot out there.
You'll find purpose in anything. Even overcoming the fact that you don't have purpose is like, oh, I don't have purpose? Watch this. I'm going to show you purpose,
Yes.
So when you lose even that, it's really hard, and you'll generate it again, but you're generating it from it gets more frantic each time.
That's a good way to describe it.
You have this vision of yourself that I'm going to be whatever, I'm going to do really good in school, or I'm going to be this kind of person in my friend group. And you find a lot of fulfillment in that, but then you lose maybe something, like I said, this ideal self had a child and was an early dad, and I lost that. So now I'm frantically trying to solve that, but now I'm finding purpose in the fact that I've lost that. So then I lose it again through infertility, and I go, well, watch how I dominate the adoption world. I'm just going to figure this out. And then I lose that, and I go, okay, well, I lost that. I'm going to figure out the foster care world. And then I lose that. And each time it multiplies the franticness, leaving me with unhealthy anxiety and going, this isn't working, because I'm backing myself into a corner and I'm becoming rabid almost, and now it's not as fun to be around me. I'm driving too fast. I'm a little too loud. I'm always a little I'm kind of a more high strung person, but at that point I'm really high strung, and I needed to take a step back and say, okay, this rhythm of losing purpose and then forcing purpose is not sustainable in the long run. I have to find I have to live in an ecosystem that allows me to find purpose in ways that are healthier.
Yes.
And that took a long time to find.
Well, it's interesting what you're describing there is that need that you have for purpose you don't have an option.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
It must be wrestled with.
Yeah.
And if it's unmet, the franticness of how many no's do you get? No's after no's after no's, you become more frantic. And because it's just that need sits unmet.
Yeah.
And so kind of the goal of all of this is understanding and having a healthy understanding of how we actually meet that need.
Yes.
Okay. So it really basically what I would say is not living in the question anymore, but living in the statement. I do have purpose. Okay. So talk to me about, by the way, I love the work that you do. And I can just, you talk about having a purpose, the work that you're doing with couples and infertility and helping and guide them and giving them the safe place to process this. I can't think of anything more impactful. Okay. It's so incredible.
If Mike Foster says I have purpose, then I believe it. All right.
Listen, it doesn't matter what I say. There's just this thing called truth. And that is so purposeful and so impactful. Yeah. But talk to me about your daily, kind of the term I use is self-leadership around staying in my primal truth of knowing my life has purpose, that I don't have to live in this franticness of this unmet need when I get those no's or those maybes.
Yeah.
How has your definition or version of purpose come to a healthier place?
Yeah, I think it's come to a healthy place through emotional connection, and not needing as much external validation in the outcome of facts. That, oh, it's a fact that this has happened, we've adopted, we've done foster care, we've got the nonprofit, this X amount of people have gone through a process group. Those are great, but saying, I think this issue of needing a purpose is less about facts and more about emotions. And there's a relational connection that I need to meet within myself, that regardless of facts, I could be the most purposeful person ever, but there's an emotional component to it that if that's not getting met, this will never meet the emotional need. So I think for me, it was building a team, I guess you could say, of emotional connections that I meet with all the time. I meet with people and emotionally validate my primal question multiple times a week.
How would they do that? Like,
I'm so vulnerable with it. I tell them, like, I struggle with feeling like I'm out of place in the world. I look at other people and see what they're doing, and I think that's more purposeful. And I doubt myself. And I need you to just like center me. I trust you as a person. Can you meet me in that emotional need? And I let it in. And I allow them to do that. I will spin off in an unhealthy direction if I go weeks and I haven't met with anyone. I haven't been vulnerable like that. So I come back to that. And it's the same. That's exactly what we help people do in our process groups, is find a moment of vulnerability to communicate what your need is, what your primal need is, to say, this is what I need. I'm going to be vulnerable with it. I trust you. Can you guys just give me feedback? Just tell me anything. And I think that to me has been the key way. And it's shocking. I'm really, just thinking about it again afresh now. There's probably no amount of facts that could happen that would externally validate my emotional need to feel like I'm living a purposeful life. And that's that's a good reminder, because it's overwhelming. It almost is a little sad to think, great, I could be 10 times bigger. I could be this, I could do this, and that could be the most, I could win an award or something like that. But if I'm not going to some of my best friends or my wife and saying, this is vulnerably where I'm at, can you just see me in that? The external wouldn't mean anything.
That's powerful, Doug. I thank you for just opening up this question and helping us just see it so much more clearly. Before we close, I'd love for you, just again, the organization that you're doing
is Uniquely Knitted. You can go.
Okay, what would be the next steps if I want to learn more about that?
Absolutely. uniquelyknitted.org. We have a podcast, actually. We talk about infertility and feelings.
What's the name of the podcast?
The Infertility Feelings Podcast.
Okay, awesome.
It's really a great place to start. If you're like, I want to talk about how this is making me feel, check that out.
Yes.
We have groups that are always open that you can join. They're virtual, 6 weeks long. And what we really think is that we can change the experience of infertility. Right now, it's such an isolating, overwhelming, painful experience. And it will always start like that. But I think for many people, they're like, okay, let me just grit and bear it, and then I'll make it to the end. Hopefully I'll like my outcome, and then I'll just forget about this whole season. But this is an impactful time. So it doesn't have to feel like that forever. You can join a group. You can be vulnerable, like what we're talking about, and get some of those needs met along the way. So we encourage you to do that.
Yeah, Doug, thank you. We'll get all the website and the podcast in the show notes. Encourage everyone to check that out. Thank you for sharing today. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and really the incredible impact that you're having in so many people's lives. Thanks. And
thank you so much to you too for giving us such an invaluable tool to analyze what that deep need is. It's so hard to find. It truly is. And you've done a wonderful job.
Oh, well, thanks, Doug.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Primal Question podcast. I hope you've learned something new about your primal question, or maybe the primal question of someone you know. If you think this episode would be helpful to a friend, I encourage you, please share it. let people know about the podcast and how it's impacted you by sending a link to a friend. If you're ready to take the next step in your own self-discovery journey, I invite you to visit primalquestion.com/podcast. That's primalquestion.com/podcast for additional free resources and to explore the opportunity to work one-on-one with a Primal Question coach. Also, for those of you who feel a calling to guide others on their journey, there's information available about how you can become a certified Primal Question coach yourself. It's a powerful way to transform lives, including your own.